Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first lecture. I'm going to try and make it as short as possible. And there are also corresponding notes in this folder about this particular poem. The first thing I want to mention is there is a slideshow with information on how to read poetry. And so for this first lecture on Maya Angelou's Still I Rise, I'm going to essentially go through all of those different things point by point, the different ways to read a poem. And not every poem will I do that with. I'll pick out some of the most important ones for the poems going along, but for now, that's what I'm going to do. Now, I may say some things on this lecture that are in addition to or complementary to what's in the notes. So the notes are not absolutely identical to the lecture, but most of the same things are in both. So, and I apologize for the scratchiness of the recording. I've been trying to fix that, and I can't seem to fix it wherever I do a video. I know I could probably do a video on my iPhone, and if I do that later, I think I will, if the sound is too bad here. So generally, I'll start by reading the poem and then talking a little bit about it. This poem is called Still I Rise, Maya Angelou's, one of her most famous poems. It was written in 1978, and of course, there's a link to her biography as well as herself reading this poem. She only died a few years ago, and she read this poem in many capacities and for many different people. So here it is, Still I Rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. So, this poem is about overcoming obstacles, and it's specific to Maya Angelou, but it's also reflective and relevant to all of us. It's one of those poems that helps us as sort of a life lesson. The first thing we think about when we look at a poem is the action and the speaker. And the action is kind of like the plot. So this poem and other poems we read will not necessarily be filled with plot, because poems, as you read in the slideshow, can also be about emotion and attitudes and behaviors. So really, this poem moves forward based on the speaker's emotions and attitudes about herself, what happened in her past, and what she can bring to the future. Who is the speaker? Well, Maya Angelou is an African-American woman. The speaker is Maya Angelou herself, based on what we know about Angelou and her life. She is speaking to an audience, you, Y-O-U. And later I'm going to talk about who the different you can be in this poem. I'll talk in later lectures about how the speaker and the poet aren't necessarily the same person, just like a narrator with a short story. However, in this case, we can fairly well assume, based on the biography, that Angelou is the speaker. So the setting, again, like the action, this could be set anywhere. Really, the setting is not relevant, except that it was written in 1978. It's a poem of attitudes and behaviors and ideas rather than plot. And then we think about craft before we even get into theme. This is a 9-stanza poem. And you look at the white spaces or breaks between the various lines. If there's a larger break, you call that a stanza. So there are 4 lines in the first stanza and 4 lines in the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. So the first 7 stanzas actually have 4 lines. The 8th stanza has 6 lines, and the 9th stanza has 9 lines. It is a rhymed poem. Now, to determine if it's a rhymed poem, we look at the entire poem, or most of the poem, if it's long, to determine a pattern, and therefore determine if it's rhymed. So we look at that first stanza, and we see the last words of that first stanza are history, lies, dirt, and rise. Well, the 2 rhymes in there are lies and rise. Then we go to the next stanza. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Because I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Gloom and room rhyme. And then we look at later stanzas. So, for example, stanza 7, surprise rhymes with sighs. We notice, after looking through the whole poem, that there is a pattern. It is a rhymed poem. Ends of the words rhyme. So it is a rhymed and rhythmic poem. That's part of the craft to think about. Punctuation. So punctuation, certainly there are periods at the end of some stanzas and lines, there are commas, but we look at the important punctuation that stands out in this poem is the question mark. And these questions make us pause a little longer, at least a second or two after each question, and notice that those questions are directed at someone. Does my haughtiness offend you? Do you want to see me broken? So speaking to the particular you or the audience as a question that she really wants answered. That's the point of this poem, is the answering of these questions if the person is upset by her sassiness. If the person wants to see her broken, it doesn't matter, because she's not going to take that. It's not going to be how she proceeds in her life to rise above the pain that she's endured. Literary devices. So there's imagery throughout, and remember, imagery is all 5 senses. So, for instance, the sight of nature through moon, suns, ocean, and tides. Tides is referenced twice. And tides, of course, showcase constant movement, and also something that she's certain of, as she says in line 10. We see an oil well pumping in her living room. We see diamonds at the meeting of her thighs. We see gold mines. Perhaps trod in the dirt. We can both see dirt, but we can also feel it, so that gives us sort of a sense of touch. And then soulful cries and laugh, that's our sense of hearing. So we have several different senses moving through this poem to give us a sense of the imagery. And then there are sound qualities: alliteration, assonance, and consonance. And remember, alliteration is when 2 words that are close to each other, they don't have to be in the same line, they can be in subsequent lines, they have the same opening consonant sound. So, for instance, in stanza 3, just like hopes springing high. Hope and high is an alliteration, and that's in line 11 with the H sound. And why is this important? We're not just looking at alliteration. We're not just saying, oh, here it is, we're finding it. There, they used alliteration. The poet wants to make a particular statement. So, hope and high, we remember that not only because you think of high hopes. Hope is something that's higher than lower, but also because of the H sound. An example of consonants. would be bowed and lowered in stanza 4. The W in the middle of bowed and the W in the middle of lowered. Those have the W sound in the middle. That consonant is memorable because bowed and lowered are synonyms. They mean the same thing, bowed and lowered. And then assonance would be I's and rise, or the long I repeated several times. I, rise. And it is something we remember also. That long I, it stretches out as we read it. It gives us something to hang on to as we think about the theme of the poem. And now finally, let's get to the use of the word you, the audience. You may trod me in the dirt. You may write me down in history. Did you want to see me broken? Does my haughtiness offend you? Well, who is she referencing here? I think she's referencing several different sets of people. One is essentially an audience of white people who have wronged African Americans, but generally those in power who have wronged her race, told them they were not good enough, not smart enough, and would never succeed. And I think the you is also referencing a specific person. Remember, in reading her biography, you'll see that there was a man who raped her when she was very young. It was her mother's boyfriend, and she was not even living with her mother at the time. But when she went to visit her mother, the mother's boyfriend raped her. And not only that, but when her family found out about that, her uncles actually killed him. So this is a horrible, terrible event that happened in her life, and something that stuck with her and actually helped her not helped her, but was one of the reasons she became an artist to deal with it. So the you could be him. So that you is lots of different people. Hang on a minute. Okay. In our notes, I have other things on specific word choices, metaphors, similes, personification, things like that. Let me just give you an example of a simile, is in line 24. When she says, still, like air, I'll rise. She's comparing herself to air, using the word like. I am like air. A person isn't normally like air. So she's making a comparison of two unlike things. There's also metaphors in here and discussions of specific words. And then finally, how does this all come together? What is the purpose of all of this? What is the meaning? I think the purpose of this poem is her self-actualization, so coming to terms with herself and who she is through language and poetry, as well as life and hope even in the face of obstacles. Historical oppression can be overcome. The poem is provocative, it's even sexual in line 7. Other times it's brassy and bold. There's nothing meek about this poem. It's all sort of laid bare. It's one that people memorize, they use as a lifestyle guide. It's one of those things that people could, if they're feeling down on a particular day, if something bad has happened to them, they can come back to this poem and say, here, still I'll rise above whatever has happened to me. In that stanza 7, she uses her sexuality to her advantage to give her confidence. It's not something to be ashamed of. Historically, Black women were oppressed and seen as sexual objects, and here she is actually at a point in history where she can revel in her sexuality. We know that she's had bad things happen. Those things have wronged the speaker. But she will not be meek or humiliated or broken by them. She will rise from the past and face the future with pride. And finally, the idea of infinite life and hope is important too. The tides are certain. She is the Black ocean. She bears in the tide. All of this is related to the very nature of life and how she, as a representative of her race, is able to overcome as people in her past when they were enslaved were not. She is rising out of the huts of history's shame in order to avenge, essentially, and be the spokesperson and representative for those who didn't have a voice then. So This poem has two different things going on, and I know this lecture was a little long. I'll try and make later ones a little shorter, but be sure you read the notes if you're watching this at all, because corresponding notes have some more information. I probably put a little bit more information in this lecture, and I will be doing these brief lectures for the other poems as we look ahead into next week. Okay, goodbye.